You're looking at Karen's luxury SUV buried in my mud trench, her HOA board member sticker barely hanging on. Did I touch it? Absolutely not. My gravity-assisted ejection system did. After 6 months of trespassing, warnings, and her flipping me off on live stream, she looked me dead in the eyes and yelled, "Do it!" So, I pressed the button. But let's look at the aftermath first. That morning, the sun hadn't even climbed all the way over the ridge when I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of hot coffee. The air was crisp, still carrying that early spring bite, the kind that wakes your bones up before your brain catches on. I walked down the gravel path out of habit, planning to check on the cattle like I do every day, but I didn't get far. About 100 yards out, right near the western property line, something bright and metallic caught the light. Not a tractor, not a tool, something far more satisfying. It was Karen's white luxury SUV, the same one I'd seen trespassing on my land more times than I could count. Only now, it wasn't trespassing, not anymore. Now it was half buried in the mud trench at the edge of my field. The rear end sat crooked, almost embarrassed, while the front wheels hung uselessly above the slope like the car was trying to climb out and just gave up. The passenger mirror dangled by a sad little wire. Mud covered half the windshield in thick, uneven strokes, like Mother Nature herself slapped the arrogance off it. And right there on the back, coated in brown clay, barely legible, was that familiar sticker, HOA board member, hanging on by one corner, flickering in the wind. Somehow the most poetic thing I'd seen in years. Next to it, the decorative decal Karen loved so much, Live, Laugh, Love, was smeared so badly that it now read something closer to Live, Lol. I admit it, I laughed out loud. But here's the thing. I didn't push it. I didn't tow it. I didn't touch it. Gravity did. Or, more accurately, the machine I built after 6 months of frustration, warnings, sheriff visits, lawyer consultations, and countless destroyed crops. Standing there, watching the SUV slowly sink deeper into the mud, I didn't feel angry or victorious. I felt calm, almost peaceful. Because this wasn't an accident, and it wasn't revenge. This was the result of a choice, her choice, repeated over and over until the consequences finally caught up. And trust me, we'll get to that part. We'll get to the certified letters she ignored, the signs she pretended she couldn't see, the sheriff she tried to manipulate, and the moment she dared me to activate my machine. But for now, all you need to know is this. Karen's SUV wasn't supposed to be anywhere near my farm. And today, thanks to physics and a little engineering know-how, it finally wasn't. Before all this, before the cameras, the warnings, the shouting, the machine, I lived a very different kind of life. One with elevators, meetings, deadlines, and a calendar so full I had to schedule my own lunch breaks weeks in advance. For nearly 20 years, I worked in logistics and mechanical planning. Not glamorous work, but good work. The kind that keeps the world moving without anyone ever noticing. I spent my days inside warehouses and offices, designing systems so packages moved faster, trucks stayed on time, and companies shaved pennies off every mile. People used to tell me I had a talent for seeing how machines and people fit together. Like, I could look at a problem and see the blueprint behind it. Maybe that's true, but talent doesn't spare you from exhaustion. And somewhere between the 15th reorganization meeting and the 20th late-night emergency conference call, something inside me just cracked. It wasn't dramatic, no slamming doors or shouting matches, just a quiet realization, one evening around 11 p.m., sitting under the flickering lights of a break room that smelled like burnt coffee. I don't want to live like this anymore. So, I didn't. I spent a year saving, planning, looking for land far from any corporate noise. And that's when I found it. 70 wide-open acres in rural Nebraska, rolling pasture, clean air, a creek cutting through the eastern side, a half-falling-apart barn that felt more honest than any office building I'd ever stepped into. And the best part? The very best part? The property line sat just outside the boundary of the Green Meadows HOA. Not inside, not partially included, completely outside. Back then, I didn't know anything about HOAs except the jokes people made about them. You know the ones. They'll fine you if your grass is too tall. They'll arrest you for painting your door the wrong shade of brown. Funny stuff. until you live next to them. But even before I knew the nightmare that would come knocking, standing there in that empty field the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The kind of peace you can hear, the wind sliding through tall grass, the creak of old wood, the hum of insects waking up for the evening. I remember taking a deep breath and thinking, this is home. This is where I start over. I fixed up the old farmhouse little by little, repaired the barn with my own hands. I got a small herd of cattle, planted corn and soybeans across the west side, and carved out a simple routine that made every day feel honest. There's something grounding about physical work, about waking up with sore shoulders but a clear mind. I traded spreadsheets for soil, fluorescent lights for sunlight, conference calls for cattle calls. And for 3 years, life was exactly what I hoped it would be. Quiet, predictable, mine. I knew the HOA neighborhood was close by. You can't miss it. All identical roofs, manicured lawns, driveways wide enough for 3 matching SUVs. But I kept to myself, and they kept to theirs. A polite, invisible line between 2 very different worlds. At least, that's how it should have stayed. But peace has a strange way of attracting trouble. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Some people can't stand the idea of boundaries they don't control, and that's where Karen enters the picture. Rolling into my life behind the wheel of a brand new luxury SUV, sunglasses so large they could signal aircraft, and an attitude that could strip paint off a barn door. But I'll get to her, trust me. We're just getting warmed up. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those plain, uneventful days where the sky is a soft blue and the wind lazily moves through the corn like it has nowhere important to be. I'd been out by the barn tightening a hinge when I heard an engine. Not a tractor engine, mind you, not the sound of a neighbor's old Ford or a delivery truck. This was different, smooth, expensive, the kind of engine that comes with a chrome badge and a monthly payment bigger than most mortgages. I stepped out from behind the barn and saw it, a white luxury SUV crawling down my private drive like it owned the place. After a few seconds, it turned off the gravel, straight into my field. At first, I genuinely thought she must be lost. People get turned around out here all the time, so I waved, friendly-like, expecting her to roll the window down and ask for directions. Nope, she kept going, tires sinking into the soft earth, carving deep ruts right through the young corn. No hesitation, no slowing down, just a steady, entitled glide deeper into my property until she finally came to a stop about 30 yards from my fence line. Then the door opened, and out stepped Karen. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew the type the moment she emerged. Perfectly styled hair, sunglasses the size of dinner plates, a bright white blouse, spotless despite the mud she was kicking up. She walked around the SUV like she was inspecting a runway, not a farm field. I took a breath, the kind you take when you're trying to stay polite, and walked toward her. "Ma'am," I called out, keeping my voice calm. "This is private property." She barely looked at me, barely acknowledged I was there. She clicked her key fob, locked the SUV, and started walking toward the HOA neighborhood like she'd done this 100 times. "Ma'am," I said again, a little louder, "you can't park here." That's when she stopped. Slowly, dramatically, she turned her head toward me like a hawk spotting something inconvenient. "Oh," she said, waving her hand in a dismissive little circle, "relax, it's just grass." "Actually," I replied, "that's my corn." She tilted her sunglasses down and looked at the plants around her feet. Then she laughed. Not a friendly laugh, not even a nervous laugh, a laugh that said, "You're beneath me." "This is common access," she declared, as if announcing the weather. "We've always used this area for overflow parking. The HOA has it documented." I blinked. "Common access? No, ma'am. This is my farm. 70 acres, paid for, registered, deeded." She smirked. "Oh, you're new," she said, as if that settled everything. "You probably just don't understand how things work around here." Then, and I will never forget this, she walked around me, not past me, around me, like I was a fence post, like I wasn't even worth navigating a direct path. She called over her shoulder, "I'll only be an hour, it's not a big deal." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there in the field, staring at her SUV sitting crooked among the corn rows, mud already pooling around the tires. I had 1,000 thoughts I could have shouted after her. Things about property rights, common decency, maybe even the definition of trespassing, but I didn't. Because I've learned something important living out here. The first incident tells you who a person is. The second tells you what you're dealing with. The third tells you what must be done. And Karen, she wasn't done. Not even close. If that first afternoon had been the end of it, maybe I would have chalked it up to a misunderstanding. A rude one, sure, but still just a moment. But folks like Karen don't just dip a toe across a boundary. They jump the fence and start rearranging the furniture. 2 days after our first encounter, I heard that engine again. Same hum. Same entitled purr of money rolling where it had no business being. I stepped outside before she even came into view, coffee still in hand. And just like before, her white SUV bounced off the gravel and nosed right into my field. Only this time, she didn't stop near the fence line. No, she drove deeper, cutting a fresh diagonal path through the young corn I'd spent weeks planting, tending, and worrying over whenever late frost threatened. She parked in almost the exact same spot she'd crushed the first time, like she was lining up for a repeat performance. She got out, didn't look my way, didn't even pretend to look embarrassed, just grabbed her purse, tossed her hair over her shoulder, and marched off toward the neighborhood like she was stepping onto a red carpet. I walked toward the SUV, placed my hand on the warm hood, and looked at the pattern of tread marks she'd left behind. Corn stalks bent and broken. Soil compacted deep enough, I'd have to till it again. Every bit of it cost money, and time, and for Karen, it was just a shortcut. The second incident told me exactly what I needed to know. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't ignorance. This was habit. And habits, once tolerated, become rights in certain people's minds. But the third time, that's when I understood the real problem. It was early morning, a chill still clinging to the air. I was walking the fence line, checking on a couple of cows who were calving soon. That's when I heard it. Not the hum of her engine this time, but a roar, a fast one, reckless. I turned just in time to see that white SUV barreling into my field like she was trying to set a land speed record, dust flying, corn snapping under the tires, a rooster tail of mud shooting up behind her like she was doing donuts in a Walmart parking lot. She wasn't driving through my land, she was storming through it. And this time, she was laughing. Window down, sunglasses on, music blaring. I swear she even honked twice, the kind of honk kids do when they want attention. When she disappeared toward the HOA gate, I just stood there, hands at my sides, heart pounding that familiar mix of anger and disbelief that only someone violating your home can trigger. When she returned that evening, right around 5 p.m., she did the exact same thing. Same path, same speed, same horn, same complete disregard for the land feeding my cattle, paying my bills, and giving me a life I'd worked hard for. And it didn't stop there. Within a week, her friends started copying her. Big shiny SUVs, minivans with school stickers, a sedan whose driver had the audacity to wave at me like I was the valet. They weren't just using my field, they were treating it like HOA property, like a side street for their convenience. And Karen? Oh, she took it further. Sometimes she'd stop her SUV right in the middle of the field, roll the window down, and shout at her phone like she was making some kind of vlog about her hard day at yoga class. Sometimes she'd leave the engine running for 15 minutes while she rummaged through the trunk, mud splashing on her heels. But the worst offense came on a windy afternoon when she brought her little designer dog, the kind of dog that shivers more than it walks, and let it run loose across my grazing area. My cattle scattered, spooked, and one young heifer twisted her leg leaping away from that yapping ball of fur. You want to see anger? Not from the cattle, from me. When I told Karen her dog almost caused real damage, she rolled her eyes and said, "Maybe you should train your cows to be less dramatic." The escalation was undeniable. It wasn't just that she didn't respect my land. It was the certainty, carved into every gesture, every laugh, every dismissive flick of her hand, that she believed she had the right to do whatever she wanted here. As if my property line interfered with her lifestyle. As if 70 acres of farmland existed purely as overflow parking for HOA events. As if leaving me with broken fences, damaged seedlings, and stressed-out cattle was just the price of living next to royalty. Standing there in the ruined rows of my field, I realized something. Karen wasn't just entitled, she was testing me. And people like that don't stop when they get what they want. They stop when they meet something that won't be moved. And I was about to become exactly that. It didn't take long for frustration to settle into something heavier, something that sat on my chest every time I stepped outside and saw fresh tire ruts carved into my land. I've got a patient nature. You don't last long in farming without one, but even patience has limits. And Karen, she was sprinting toward them. So I started simple. A sign. A clean white metal sign. Bold red letters. No parking private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I posted it right where she'd been driving in, high enough to see from a distance. Reflective for mornings and nights. Hard to miss. I remember hammering it into the ground, thinking, that ought to do it. No one can claim confusion now. Well, I underestimated Karen. The next morning, I watched from my porch as she slowed down just long enough to read the sign, leaned forward in her seat, sunglasses glinting, lips pursed. Then she shrugged and drove right past it, cut through the same path, parked in the same spot. Later that afternoon, I walked out and examined the base of the sign. She'd driven close enough that mud splashed across half the wording. I wiped it off with my sleeve and stared at the dent in the metal post. This wasn't ignorance anymore. This was defiance. So I escalated too. I added 4 more signs along her route. Private farm, not whole property. No vehicle access. Do not enter agricultural land. Absolutely no parking under any circumstances. The next day, she breezed by all of them like they were yard sale decorations. That's when I realized I needed documentation. Real documentation. I drove to town and met with my attorney, Jim Sutton. Good man, sharp mind, the kind of lawyer who reads every footnote just to be sure. I laid everything out on his desk. Pictures of the ruts, time-stamped videos, a map of my property. Jim listened carefully, tapping his pen on the folder. There's no shared easement? He asked. No, I said. Not a trace. I checked everything when I bought the place. He nodded. Then she's trespassing, repeatedly, and intentionally. We can send her a cease and desist, formally. That's step 1. So, we did. Jim drafted a precise letter, respectful, legal, thorough, stating, my property boundary, proof of ownership. That all access roads belong solely to me, that her driving, parking, and entering the land constituted trespassing, and that failure to stop would result in legal action and liability for damages. We sent it certified mail. Karen signed for it. I had the receipt. For a moment, a brief, hopeful moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, reason would seep through whatever barrier protects her from consequences. But the next morning, I found the letter shredded in my field, pieces scattered like confetti after a parade. I followed the trail with my boot until I found one scrap that still had ink on it. A sentence from Jim's letter, torn in half. Continued use will result in... Right beside it were fresh tire tracks. That afternoon, I got an email from Karen. The subject line read, misunderstanding regarding HOA access. The message began politely, unnervingly politely, and quickly spiraled into a fantasy world. According to Karen, the HOA had a historical buffer easement running through the western edge of my property. She even attached a map I'd never seen before, one that looked strangely homemade. It had a dotted line drawn in pink highlighter, a little arrow pointing into my land, a legend that said Community Access Zone, and the HOA logo copied and pasted in the corner like a school project. I stared at it for a solid minute. It wasn't a county document, wasn't stamped, wasn't signed, wasn't even formatted like a real map. Jim later told me it reminded him of something a bored teenager would mock up on Microsoft Paint. But Karen wrote, as a member of the HOA board, I'm informing you that our community has used this access point for decades. We expect you to respect shared use rights. Decades? I'd only owned the land for 3 years, and the old farmer before me swore he never allowed a single HOA car through. I replied with exactly 2 sentences. This map is not legally valid. There is no easement on my deed. Her response? 3 words. We'll see about that. And from that moment on, the tone changed. Her trespassing wasn't casual anymore. It was purposeful, a challenge, a message. Karen wasn't just breaking rules. She was daring me to try to stop her. And as you'll soon learn, I eventually did. It was only a matter of time before the law got involved. Not because I called them first, but because Karen had finally decided to weaponize the thing entitled, people always reach for when they're wrong and know it, victimhood. It started on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was repairing a fence post near the south pasture when I heard tires skidding somewhere near the barn. Not the usual crunch of gravel, something sharper, faster, more frantic. By the time I rounded the corner, Karen was standing beside her SUV, arms flailing like a windmill caught in a storm. In front of her was a sheriff's cruiser, and Sheriff Dale Morrison, a good man, reasonable, level-headed, was climbing out. Karen pointed at me the moment I appeared. "There!" she shrieked. "That's him! That's the man who threatened me!" Sheriff Morrison looked between us with that tired expression law enforcement gets when they know they've stepped into something messy. I walked up slow, wiped the dirt from my gloves, and nodded politely. "Afternoon, Sheriff." Karen spun toward him like a stage actress. "You see, he's calm now, but you didn't hear him earlier. He screamed at me. He blocked me in. He ran at my car. I feared for my life." Sheriff Morrison raised an eyebrow just enough for me to notice. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "could you tell me exactly what happened?" Karen placed one hand dramatically over her chest, like she'd rehearsed the move. "I was parking in the HOA's community access lane, the one we've all used for years, and he came running out of the barn screaming obscenities. He said he'd tow my vehicle, that he'd deal with me personally, and that I better pray the sheriff never finds out. He intimidated me." I bit the inside of my cheek, hard, because none of that was true, not one syllable. But the thing about lies is, when they're spoken with enough confidence, they almost sound real. Almost. Sheriff Morrison turned to me. "Marcus, did any of that happen?" "No, sir," I said evenly. "Not a bit of it, but I can show you something." I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the folder labeled Trespass, Evidence, and tapped the most recent video. The sheriff watched as Karen drove straight past my signs, right into my field, and nearly clipped one of my irrigation lines. Then another video. Then pictures. Timestamps, GPS pins, multiple angles. Karen's face tightened with every image. That's edited," she blurted. "He's manipulating things." Sheriff Morrison angled his head. "Ma'am, these are standard trail cam captures. Time-stamped, sequential, hard to fake." Karen's lips trembled with that special kind of indignation people feel when their lie isn't landing. "Well, you should be arresting him, not interrogating me," she snapped. "I am a member of the HOA board, and I have rights." The sheriff closed his notebook with a soft thump, the kind of sound that lets you know he's already made up his mind. "Ma'am, being part of an HOA board doesn't give you rights on someone else's private property." She gasped like he had slapped her with the Constitution. He turned to me next, his voice softer. "Marcus, I've seen enough here to know this is a civil matter, unless we catch her refusing to leave after being asked. I can file a report, document the trespassing, but you'll need to handle this through legal channels." I nodded. I'd seen it coming. Karen, however, was not done. She jabbed a finger toward my signs. "Those are illegal," she declared. "You can't just put signs anywhere you want. This is HOA overflow land." Sheriff Morrison adjusted his belt. "Ma'am, I checked the county parcel maps before I came here. This land belongs entirely to Marcus Chen. There is no easement. None. You need to treat it as private property." Karen's voice cracked with outrage. "I will not. This is harassment. This man is dangerous." I could see the moment when the sheriff's patience evaporated. He sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and said, "Ma'am, the only danger I'm seeing here is you driving through someone's crops at 30 miles an hour." That line hung in the air like a bell tolling in a church. Karen sputtered. Her hands opened and closed, searching for a story that hadn't been invented yet. But Sheriff Morrison just tipped his hat to me. "I'll file the report, Marcus, document everything. And good luck." And with that, he returned to his cruiser. Karen slammed her SUV door, spun the wheels, and threw a thick spray of mud across my boots as she sped away. I watched her go, mud dripping from my jeans, and realized something crystal clear. Sheriff or not, legal system or not, Karen wasn't scared. Karen wasn't backing down. Karen was just getting started. There's a saying old farmers use out here, one my father repeated so often it stuck to my bones. Land can take a beating, but animals feel it. I didn't fully understand that until the day everything changed. It was late afternoon, the sky hanging low and gray, the kind of evening where the wind carries a warning. I'd been tending to Daisy, one of my gentlest heifers, pregnant with her second calf. She was a good girl, sweet, calm, trusted me enough to eat right out of my hand. Cattle know routine, they know peace, and they know disruption. That day, she was grazing near the western fence, close to where the cornfield met the property line. I remember patting her neck, feeling her steady breaths, the soft warmth of her coat under my palm. And then I heard it, that engine, again, louder this time, meaner. I turned and saw the white SUV flying across the field like it was late for an emergency. Music blasted from the open windows, some pulsing beat that didn't belong in a farm field. Karen's sunglasses glinted in the setting sun. She honked, twice, sharp, ugly blasts. Daisy jumped at the sound, startled so hard she stumbled. I felt my chest tighten. "Easy, girl, easy," I whispered, holding my hands out. But Karen wasn't done. She swerved, actually swerved, toward the grazing area, kicking up a wave of dirt that struck Daisy's hind legs. Daisy panicked. She bolted left, then right, legs sliding in the soft ground. And then, with a heartbreaking thud, she fell sideways onto her hip. I dropped my tools and ran. By the time I reached her, Karen was already gone, a trail of dust settling behind the trees, like she'd never been there. Daisy lay on her side, trembling, big, gentle body heaving with fear, her eyes wide, whites showing. I knelt beside her and pressed my forehead to her neck. "It's all right, girl. You're all right. You're safe." But she wasn't, not fully. That night, I called the vet. He found bruising, stress spasms, and elevated heart rate, all signs of severe fright. He warned me, stress like this, especially this close to calving, can cause complications. I hardly slept. I stayed in the barn with her until sunrise. Every few hours, she groaned softly, shifting her weight like the pain wouldn't let her settle. The next morning, she miscarried. A stillborn calf, small, lifeless, and silent, lay in the straw. I sat there beside her for a long time, hands steady, even though everything inside me churned. Daisy nudged the calf weakly, not understanding. Animals grieve. Any farmer will tell you that. And right there, something inside me hardened. Not anger, not rage, resolve. This wasn't about inconvenience anymore. It wasn't about ruts in the soil or crushed corn stalks. This was harm, real harm, to living creatures who had done nothing wrong. And the worst part? Karen didn't care. She didn't even know what she'd caused. And she wouldn't have cared if she did. But the universe wasn't done stacking the deck. 2 days after Daisy's miscarriage, I woke to find 3 vehicles parked in my lower field, a little impromptu HOA parking lot. There was a baby shower in the neighborhood, and apparently word had spread that the farm guy doesn't mind. I stood there, staring at the cars lined up in neat little rows across my grass. One of them had a balloon tied to the mirror. Another had a "World's Best Aunt" bumper sticker. One woman, heels sinking into the mud, waved at me cheerfully. "Thanks for letting us park here. The cul-de-sac is full." I didn't respond. I just walked back to the barn, sat on a bale of hay, and let the reality sink in. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it. She'd spread the word, invited people, turned my home, my land, into an unauthorized extension of her world. And I realized something crucial. No amount of talking, warning, or paperwork was going to stop her. She believed she owned my land. She believed she controlled my boundaries. She believed consequences were for other people. So, if she wanted to test me, well, I was finally ready to push back. And the machine, the one that would change everything, was already forming in the back of my mind. After Daisy's miscarriage, the world felt quieter, not peaceful, just heavy, the kind of quiet that settles after something breaks inside you. I spent that night sitting in the barn, listening to Daisy's tired breaths, watching the straw shift with every tremble of her body. And sometime around dawn, I made up my mind. Talking hadn't worked, warnings hadn't worked, law hadn't worked. Karen didn't respect boundaries, so I needed something she couldn't ignore. And this mattered more than anything. Whatever I built had to be legal, documented, defensible, because people like Karen don't fight fair. They twist your reactions into weapons against you. So, before lifting a finger, I called my lawyer, Jim Sutton. I laid out the general idea, not the colorful version, just the bones of it. A wooden platform, a tilting mechanism, a gravity slide that would gently nudge trespassing vehicles off my land and into a mud-catch basin. There was a long pause on the phone, then Jim sighed. Marcus, technically, if you put up clear warning signs, if it's not designed to hurt anyone, and if gravity is doing the work, it's not illegal. Another pause. And for the love of God, don't call it a catapult. I promised I wouldn't. The idea took shape faster than I expected. A simple tilt platform, disguised as an ordinary flat wooden surface. Strong enough to hold an SUV, balanced enough to tilt once a certain weight threshold was met. I built the frame from reclaimed barn beams, added steel hinges underneath, and installed a detent lock mechanism tied to a counterweight system disguised as a stack of hay bales. I tested the mechanics with progressively heavier loads. First, a half-ton hay bale, then an old rusted water tank, then my pride and joy, my old Ford farm truck. That test, I'll never forget it. I drove the truck up onto the platform, killed the engine, climbed down, and walked around to the release lever. I gripped the handle, took a breath, and pulled. Clunk. A sharp, clean metal snap, the detent locking open. The platform shifted beneath the weight. Then, whoosh, the truck slid downward like it had been waiting for this moment its whole life. Smooth, controlled, no jerking, no danger, just pure, beautiful physics doing exactly what physics was meant to do. When the Ford reached the end of the slide, it eased into the mud trench with a thick, satisfying squelch. I climbed down into the trench, checked the truck, not a scratch, started right up and drove out of the mud in 4D. The system was safer than the HOA's actual roads. I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. That was the moment I knew this would work. Now I needed to make sure the whole thing was technically legal and visually obvious. So I went overboard with warnings. I posted industrial signs around the boundary. Danger, active machinery, unsafe for vehicles. Automatic tilting platform, not HOA property, private farm equipment. And then, because documentation is the king of all defenses, I photographed every sign, recorded a video explaining the mechanism, filed copies with my attorney, emailed a notice to the county office, even sent a generic safety notice to the sheriff's department. But there was still one thing missing. To work. To really work. Karen had to choose the platform, not avoid it, not hesitate, choose it. So I cleaned it spotless, swept away the dust, smoothed the boards, even laid a little gravel ramp leading to it. And then I installed the final piece of bait, a brand new sign at the center of the platform, VIP parking, authorized personnel only, big, shiny, clean, Karen bait in its purest form. Because here's one thing you learn dealing with people like her. If they think something is reserved, they think it's reserved for them. And if they think something is off limits, they think the rule doesn't apply. The moment I hammered that sign into place, I stepped back and looked at my creation. A simple wooden platform, a hidden hinge mechanism, a gravity drop calibrated like a well-tuned instrument, a mud trench waiting right at the border, a system that didn't harm anyone, didn't launch anything, didn't break a single law, a system that simply said, if you choose to trespass, gravity will escort you out. And deep in my bones, I knew something with absolute certainty. Karen wouldn't resist it. People like her never do. For 3 days after finishing the platform, I waited, not with impatience, not with excitement, but with the quiet, steady patience every farmer learns over time. You plant a seed, you water it, you wait. Karen was no different. She was predictable, a creature of habit and ego. She would come, and when she did, the machine would be ready. On the morning of the 4th day, the sky was bright, wind calm, sun warming the barns the way it only does in late spring. I stepped outside with my coffee and instinctively looked toward the west field. And there she was. Karen's white SUV, polished so bright it looked like a pearl rolling across the horizon, turning off the HOA service road and onto my land with the confidence of someone stepping into her own kitchen. Her engine hummed across the field, her wheels chewed through the grass. Her sunglasses reflected the sky like a pair of mirrored shields. And she saw the platform. I could see it in her posture, the tiny lift of her chin, the way her shoulders straightened, the spark of recognition as her eyes locked onto the shiny new sign. VIP parking. Authorized personnel only. That was all it took. She didn't slow down. She didn't examine the ground. She didn't question why a VIP space existed on a farm. No, she accelerated. I walked calmly into the barn, grabbed the handheld camera I'd set up for exactly this moment, and toggled on the live stream to my cloud backup. Then I took the megaphone from the workbench. It still had flecks of old red paint on the handle. I stepped out into the sunlight and positioned myself about 40 yards away, close enough for her to hear me, far enough to stay out of her theatrics. The SUV rolled up onto the platform with a smooth thunk, her tires fitting perfectly in the shallow grooves I'd sanded into the wood. She braked. The engine idled. She was exactly where she needed to be. I lifted the megaphone. "Attention, driver of the white SUV," I called, my voice echoing across the field. "You are parked on active farm machinery. Move your vehicle immediately. This is your only warning." Karen snapped her head toward me, eyes flashing with annoyance. She leaned out the window. "Oh, please," she yelled back. "I'm not stupid. Your little scare tactics don't work on me." I raised the megaphone again. "This area is unsafe. You have 10 seconds to vacate. This is an automated tilting platform. Move your vehicle now." Karen revved the engine as if to mock me. Then she lifted one hand out her window. Her middle finger pointed at the sky. I waited a beat, let the silence settle. Then I gave her one last chance. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. If you do not move your vehicle, the system will activate. Gravity will do the rest." She laughed, loud, sharp, triumphant. Then she leaned out the window and screamed, "Do it!" That was it. The moment I'd known would come. The moment she crossed the final line. The moment she fully, publicly, voluntarily chose the consequences. I lifted my camera to capture her face perfectly in frame. Then I reached behind me, grasped the release lever disguised on the fence post, the simple wooden handle that controlled the detent. For a split breath, time stood still. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight. Then, clank! The metal lock snapped open with a deep, cold, industrial bite of steel. Karen barely had time to scream. The platform dipped, the SUV shifted, tilted, and then, exactly as designed, whoosh! The entire vehicle slid backwards off the platform in one smooth, unstoppable motion. Not launched, not thrown, just guided by gravity itself. Straight into the mud trench I'd dug at the property line. The SUV landed with a wet, heavy squelch, mud exploding upward in a thick, glorious arc across the white paint. And then, silence. The engine sputtered once, coughed twice, then died completely. Karen's sunglasses tilted crooked on her face as she stared out the windshield in shock. The pure, uncontested expression of someone who just learned, for the very first time, that the world does not revolve around her. And me? I took a deep, steady breath, because I knew what was coming next. The shouting, the panic, the sheriff, the accusations. But I also knew something else. Every second of it, every sound, every warning, every sign, had been recorded. Karen hadn't just parked in the wrong spot. She had parked herself into her own consequences. For a few long seconds after the SUV landed in the trench, Karen just sat there, frozen behind the wheel, mouth open, sunglasses crooked like they were embarrassed to be part of the scene. Then the screaming began, not just shouting, a full-blown meltdown. "What did you do? You tried to kill me! This is illegal! You're going to prison!" Her words echoed across the field, bouncing off the barn like a wild animal trapped in a tin can. I didn't respond, not yet. I simply lifted the camera, steady hands, calm breath, and zoomed in on her face. Documentation, always documentation. Karen struggled to push her door open. The mud sucked at it like glue, so she had to shove it twice before it finally swung out. She climbed out of the SUV, one shoe sinking immediately into the trench. She wobbled, waved her arms, then yanked her foot free with a loud, wet schlop. That's when she pointed at me with a shaking finger. "You!" she screamed. "You assaulted me! You set a trap! You could have killed me!" I spoke slowly, clearly, almost as if narrating something for a courtroom. "Karen, I warned you, repeatedly. You ignored every sign. You refused to move when told. You verbally dared me to activate the system. Everything is recorded." She shrieked back, I didn't dare you. You tricked me. I pressed a button on the camera. Instant replay. Her voice rang loud and undeniable. Do it! Karen's face drained of color. Then she did what entitled people always do when caught red-handed. She doubled down. My husband, she screamed. The HOA! They're going to sue you! They're going to take this entire farm. This is all public property. I raised an eyebrow. Sharon, that trench you're standing in? That mud belongs to me, too. She stepped forward angrily, and immediately sank her other shoe ankle deep. The mud made a loud sucking noise as she tried to pull free. Behind me, the barn cat watched the entire thing like it was the best entertainment of the month. Karen finally wrenched herself loose and stomped toward me, mud splashing up her legs. I'm calling the police, she yelled. I'm reporting you for attempted murder. I nodded calmly. I already called the sheriff. They'll be here any moment. She blinked. You... what? I called them when you refused to move your vehicle after the 10-second warning. Karen froze in place like a bird spotting a predator. Her eyes darted around, searching for something to blame, something to twist, some angle of innocence to cling to. She found none. And then, right on cue, the sound of a familiar engine came rumbling down my gravel drive. Sheriff Morrison's cruiser. Karen immediately snapped back into character, shoulders hunched, hands trembling, breath shaky, her victim mode. She ran toward him. Officer! Officer! She wailed. Thank God you're here. This man tried to kill me. He tried to launch my car off a cliff. Sheriff Morrison stepped out, slowly took off his sunglasses, and surveyed the scene. The tilted platform, the mud trench, Karen covered in dirt, her SUV sitting like a wounded whale, and me, standing calmly with a camera. He took a long breath. Ma'am, he said, where exactly do you see a cliff? Karen sputtered. The machine. He used a catapult. I held up a finger. No, sir. Gravity-assisted ejection system, completely documented. And she was given 3 clear warnings. Karen shrieked, He's lying! He's lying about everything! I pressed play on the video. Sheriff Morrison leaned in. Clank, the lock releasing. Whoosh, the SUV sliding. Squelch, the landing. If he tried to hide his smile, he failed. He turned his head slightly, just enough that Karen couldn't see the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Then he cleared his throat and said, in the driest tone I've ever heard, Well, ma'am, technically, gravity isn't illegal. Karen gasped, like someone had slapped her with the Bill of Rights. Sheriff Morrison lifted a hand toward her SUV. Ma'am, you were on active farm equipment. You ignored warnings. Again, we need to discuss trespassing, and property damage, and your refusal to comply. She made a sound somewhere between a sob and a growl. This is an injustice. I'm the victim here. The sheriff folded his arms. Ma'am, the only victim I'm seeing is the mud. I couldn't stop myself. A tiny chuckle escaped, and that's when Karen saw it. The truth settling on her face like a slow, heavy dawn. She had finally trapped herself. Sheriff Morrison stood there for a long while, boots sinking half an inch into the soft earth, eyes scanning between Karen, the tilted platform, and her half-buried SUV. Her luxury ride sat crooked in the mud like a whale stranded on shore, the chrome grille sagging, and that proud little HOA board member sticker now hanging by a single muddy corner. A symbol of authority turned into a punchline. The sheriff took a slow walk around the platform, leaning down to inspect the hinge. When his knuckles tapped the steel, the sound wasn't comedic. It wasn't a springy cartoon noise. It was industrial, heavy, cold, clank. He nodded, almost impressed. That's some serious craftsmanship, Marcus. Karen sucked in a breath like he'd stabbed her. You're praising him? That thing nearly killed me. Sheriff didn't even glance her way. He rotated the hinge with 2 fingers, letting the beam shift an inch. The machinery responded with a low, grinding growl. Grrrnk. Metal on metal, weight shifting. A sound that didn't apologize for being real or dangerous. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. Karen took 2 steps back. I don't feel safe here. Sheriff straightened and dusted his jeans. Well, ma'am, considering all those signs, you weren't supposed to. He pointed to the bright placards circling the area. Active machinery, unsafe for vehicles, VIP parking, authorized personnel only. She finally noticed them, and the VIP sign made her face scrunch like she'd bitten a lemon. That VIP sign is fake. This is entrapment. Sheriff choked on a laugh and turned away, pretending to cough. Entrapment's something police do, ma'am, not farmers. She spun toward me like an arrow. He built a weapon! Sheriff thumped the hinge with his palm. Clank. Well, technically, what he built is just gravity on a hinge. Her brain broke right there. You could see it happen. I kept recording. Documentation. Always. Karen, desperate for someone to back her up, yanked her phone out with muddy fingers and dialed a number. Her screen was instantly streaked with brown sludge, and smeared right across it was a goofy photo of their golden retriever wearing a birthday hat. Mud covered half the dog's face. Somehow, that made her look even more alone. "Richard," she screamed into the phone, "get over here right now! He attacked me! He catapulted my SUV!" On speaker, her husband's voice was painfully clear. "Karen, I told you to stop going over there." Her mouth opened like a barn door in a windstorm. "What? Are you serious? You're taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of not losing our insurance. And you're standing in mud again, aren't you?" This is not my fault." "Karen, please, just stop." Click. The call ended. She stared at the phone screen, stared at that muddy golden retriever face, like the universe itself had betrayed her. She tried again. A new number. Her lawyer this time. "Bradley, you need to get out here now. This farmer tried to kill me." Sheriff raised an eyebrow. I made sure the camera saw it. On the line, her lawyer's exhausted voice responded. "Karen, is this about the parking thing again?" "This isn't parking. This is murder." Sheriff cleared his throat. "If gravity's murder, ma'am, we're all guilty." Even through the phone, her lawyer sounded done with life. "Karen, I told you not to talk to anyone. Not the farmer, not the sheriff, not me on the phone. Stop talking until I arrive." Click. Another hang-up. Karen stared at the screen again, and now the mud on the golden retriever had spread. Her thumb had smeared it worse. Only one confused puppy eye glowed back at her through a swamp of brown sludge. Even the dog looked disappointed. Sheriff Morrison let out a slow sigh and flipped open his citation book. "Ma'am, based on the video evidence, the warnings, the property line, and the 6 months of documented trespassing, I'm issuing a criminal trespass citation." Karen staggered back like he'd physically pushed her. "You can't do this! I'm the victim!" Sheriff asked me without looking up. "You want to add the property damage and livestock endangerment?" I nodded. Karen shrieked. "You're all conspiring against me." Sheriff clicked his pen shut. "No, ma'am. We're just standing on the ground, and ground, far as I know, doesn't lie." She looked at him, at me, at the sunken SUV, at the crooked sticker, at her mud-covered phone, at the half-buried golden retriever photo. And for the first time since I'd known her, Karen had absolutely nothing left to say. The tow truck arrived just after noon, its engine echoing through the quiet fields. Walt, the oldest and most cynical tow truck driver in the county, stepped out with a slow, knowing grin. "Well," he drawled, hooking his hands on his belt, "ain't this a pretty sight?" Karen didn't answer. She stood ankle-deep in mud, arms folded tight, mascara smeared in streaks she didn't seem to notice. Her SUV sat cross-legged in the trench like a stubborn hog, wheels half submerged, the undercarriage packed with mud so thick it looked like adobe. Her HOA board member sticker was barely clinging on, just one muddy corner left. It swayed sadly in the breeze, like even the adhesive had lost faith in her. Walt climbed into the trench with a long metal hook. The mud squelched around him. He muttered, "That's going to cost a fortune to clean out. Differentials full of muck, sensors fried, underbody bent. Might as well call this one totaled." Karen let out a tiny broken sound. Not quite a word, not quite a cry, somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. Sheriff Morrison handed her the paperwork, his tone patient but official. "These are the charges for criminal trespass and property damage. Court date is listed at the bottom. You'll receive a mailed copy as well." Karen didn't take the paper at first. She stared at it like he was offering her a live snake. Sheriff waited a moment, then gently nudged it toward her again. Finally, she grabbed it with trembling fingers. Mud smeared across the signature line. Walt began winching the SUV. The machine groaned, chains rattling, mud sucking like quicksand as the vehicle slowly peeled free. The sound was awful. A long, wet skrrr, like the land itself was reluctant to let go of the trouble it had swallowed. As the SUV rose, a chunk of dried mud slapped onto the ground, revealing that stupid Live Laugh Love decal under the license plate. Only now it read, Live Laugh. The O had been ripped off by the mud. Even nature was roasting her. While Walt strapped the SUV to the flatbed, Karen pulled out her phone again, hands trembling. She tapped the screen. Mud smeared across the goofy picture of her golden retriever in a birthday hat. She winced. Even her dog looked disappointed in her. Signal was weak here, but finally her email refreshed. She opened one, then froze. Her voice cracked. No, 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 no. She read it out loud before she realized she was reading it out loud. Dear Mrs. Piton, after review, we cannot process your claim. Insurance covers accidents, not willful trespassing, not ignoring posted warnings, and not localized gravity experiments. She reread that last line twice, jaw hanging. I had to look away so I wouldn't laugh. Sheriff pinched the bridge of his nose and muttered, Lord have mercy. Karen staggered like she'd been gut-punched. She sank down onto a semi-dry patch of dirt. Shoulders slumped so low she looked half her height. My husband, he'll fix this, she whispered, but even she didn't seem to believe it. I didn't have the heart to remind her he'd already hung up on her twice that morning. Walt walked over with the clipboard. All right, miss. Tow to your house is $650. Impound is $120 a day if you can't take it immediately. Clean up and repair on the SUV, well, you may want to sit down for that. She was already sitting. Walt continued. With the mud, the sensors, the damage to the drivetrain, and whatever's cracked underneath, it's probably 12, maybe 15,000. And that's the optimistic number. Karen stared ahead, glassy-eyed, like her brain had unplugged itself for self-preservation. Sheriff nodded toward his car. I can give you a ride home, ma'am. She stood mechanically, following him like someone walking in a dream. Before getting in, she turned back toward me. Her voice was small, the smallest I'd ever heard from her. You're going to regret this. I met her eyes. I warned you. 6 months straight. Every chance in the world. She blinked hard, once. Then Sheriff closed the patrol car door. They drove off. Walt followed with her SUV. And the field finally fell silent. For the first time in half a year, I could hear the creek again. I could hear my cattle grazing on the far slope. I could hear my own breathing. Peace. Real peace. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Meadowbrook Estates. Not from Karen, not from Richard, but from the new acting board president. A single paragraph. The HOA does not endorse Mrs. Peaton's actions. Her conduct does not reflect our values. We offer our apologies for the repeated trespassing and any distress it caused. No signature, just a typed name. Anonymous accountability. A week after that, I learned they'd taken away Karen's community access privileges, suspended her HOA role, and put her under review for conduct unbecoming. Rumor said she stopped showing up to meetings entirely. Rumor also said Richard had moved out. And rumor further said Karen's precious SUV had been officially totaled. None of it surprised me. The land has a way of humbling folks. Gravity, too. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun melt into the horizon, turning the fields gold. No headlights cutting across my property. No luxury SUV idling in my pasture. No HOA entitlement screaming across my fence line. Just quiet. Just my land. Mine. The kind of silence you can only earn by standing your ground, calmly, legally, and with the help of a little physics. And as I rocked back in that old porch chair, I laughed to myself. Next time someone asks me what happened to Karen's SUV, I'll tell them the truth. I didn't touch it. Gravity did.